Coronel, good morning. Welcome to Mexico and thank you for your time to make this interview possible.
Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be with you and to be speaking to you and your listeners or your viewers on this show today.
Coronel, I know you have worked in the British Army for more than 30 years, but you have also collaborated with the Israel Defense Forces. What is your opinion about the security conflict that Israel has to face every day?
I think something that people don't really understand if you don't live in Israel or visit Israel frequently is that Israel is almost in a constant state of siege. They've got enemies on every side with the exception of the Mediterranean Sea. They're facing threats coming from far away threats coming from countries like Iran. They've got close threats from the territories of Gaza and the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, from across the border in Syria and from Lebanon in the north and in the south from Sinai. So in every direction they face threats. At the same time, when you visit Israel, it's nothing like that. It doesn't appear to be anything like that. The country carries on as normal. The people are very happy. Israel's been designated one of the most satisfied and happiest populations anywhere in the world. And when an attack takes place in Israel, it's remarkable how quickly the situation returns to normal. I was in a restaurant recently in Israel which had just the day before suffered a severe attack with people killed in that restaurant. The next day it was back operating as usual. So they're very resilient people, very tough, and they can withstand the attacks that they face with a remarkable spirit and national confidence.
Your knowledge about military issues and intelligence services is amazing. From your point of view, which is the most important threat that puts the safety of Israel at risk?
Well, Israel faces a wide range of threats, and I think the most serious threat that it faces is a threat from Iran. And Iran is governed by a group of ayatollahs who are irrational. They don't think as we think. And when they say, which they say frequently, they're going to eradicate Israel and annihilate the state of Israel, they mean it. People take that because it's the sort of thing that is just abhorrent and alien to Western ears, and they take it as being a fantasy. It's not a fantasy. This is the kind of action that these ayatollahs in Iran want to do, and if they're given the chance, they will do it. And that's why the deal that was agreed between the United States, other permanent members of the Security Council, and Iran to remove sanctions from Iran, to release funds to Iran, billions of dollars to Iran, and to only restrict for a short period of time their ability to develop a nuclear weapon, is a very serious threat to Israel. It's also a very serious threat to the region and the world, and we've seen Iran's expanding imperial aggression in different parts of the Middle East. In my opinion, the threat to Israel is a very real one from Iranian nuclear weapons. And Israel will have to stop it from happening because no other country in the world will stop that. Israel has stopped a nuclear program in Iraq, it stopped a nuclear program in Syria, and it will have to stop the nuclear program in Iran at some point in the future.
But nobody else sees it that way.
Not many people do. Israelis, the Prime Minister of Israel, the generals, the intelligence services, and those people in the know around the world understand the threat. It's a very real threat. But the problem is that the President of the United States, the leaders of some of the other countries in the world have taken the view that they want to pull out, they want to pull back from the Middle East, and they want Iran to be a more dominant country. And they have seen that appeasing Iran in the way that Iran's been appeased, they see that as being a way of allowing Iran to become more dominant in the region, to give them less of a policing role. But it's a really big mistake, and we've seen what Iran have done. Iran have fired and fueled the civil war in Syria. Iran has placed into Lebanon tens of thousands of missiles pointing at Israel. Iran is sponsoring a very, very bloody civil war that's taking place in Yemen. And Iran is fueling the conflict in Iraq. So everywhere you look, Iran is presenting a danger in the region. The likelihood Iran will develop a nuclear weapon instills fear into most countries in that region, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, other countries, and therefore they themselves now have plans for nuclear weapons. A nuclear arms race is going to ensue as a result of the US and the permanent members of the Security Council's policy on Iran.
Could this threat endanger the existence of Israel, Or do you think that 70 years after its creation, Israel has its existence guaranteed?
I have no worries about the future of Israel. Ever since, I mean, you have to look back even before the creation of the State of Israel. Go back to the 1920s, 1930s, when Jewish people who lived in Palestine, now the land of Israel, were under attack from Arab gangs. They wanted to remove them from the territory, even before the State of Israel. And then on the birth of the State of Israel in 1948, by a Security Council resolution, it was rejected by many Arab countries. And even as Israel was born, it was invaded by 5 Arab armies who were driven back by this tiny little country of Israel. And ever since then, Israel's been attacked by massed Arab forces and has defeated them every time. Knowing they couldn't defeat Israel through conventional military force, they've turned to terrorism, and they've turned to a campaign of anti-Israeli propaganda, trying to pressurize Israel by propaganda spread around the world. And every single attack that Israel's faced, whether it's a physical attack, whether it's a terrorist attack, whether it's some kind of an attack on a political warfare attack, Israel's resisted it, and I'm confident Israel will continue to resist it. But Israel does need friends in the rest of the world to do that. It needs us to help them. Not necessarily militarily, because militarily they can fend off, I think, anything that faces them. But they do need our help in the broader context of supporting Israel's right to exist. Israel has just as much right to exist as Mexico, Great Britain, or the United States of America. And it's important that those of us who understand these things stand up for Israel and fight off those people who want to undermine the legitimacy of Israel.
Yes, Israel has a great army, but there is a war that Israel always loses, the media war. Talking about image, why does Israel always lose?
We have been watching the world's greatest slur campaign that's ever taken place in the history of the world against Israel. And it's a campaign that is funded by many states, by many Arab states. It's joined by international organizations like the United Nations, by human rights groups, so-called, by some world governments, who have ganged up on Israel to undermine its legitimacy. And when you've got that weight of action against you, because no other country's faced this, no other country in history has ever faced this kind of weight of political abuse against it that Israel gets. And when you have that, it's very hard to win. And Israelis do their best to put forward the good news stories about the country. They can talk about the technology, the phenomenal contribution, the unparalleled contribution that Israel makes to the world by its technology. The drugs we use to keep us alive, the computers we have, almost everything that we use in the world today is to a large extent the result of Israeli expertise and prowess. Israel can talk about the Nobel Peace Prize winners, the Nobel Science winners that it's got, which is incomparable to others. It can talk about the way that it sets up field hospitals, for example, on the border with Gaza, sets up field hospitals to treat people wounded in the Syrian civil war, sends out natural disaster relief organizations, including, I think, the first one that Israel ever did was here in Mexico when you had the earthquake. That was Israel's first international deployment to help another country. You can talk about all these things. No one cares. No one cares. All they care about is the fact that Israel is the bully boy on the block. And they see Israel nowadays as the strong power. They see the Palestinians as the weak power. What they don't see is what's behind the Palestinians. They don't see Iran funding Palestinian terror. They don't see Turkey funding Palestinian terror. They don't see other Arab states funding it. They see Israel as a big, tough bully boy on the block versus the little guy, the Palestinian, but it's not like that at all. In fact, it's the opposite. The opposite is true. But that's why it's so hard for Israel to win the propaganda campaign.
I couldn't agree more. So in a few words, what would you tell the millions of people in the world that think the Israel Defense Forces are cruel and out of scale?
I've spent a great deal of time in Israel. I was there during the last 2 conflicts in Gaza. I watched what was happening. I spoke to soldiers. I observed soldiers in action. I've got to know Israeli military and intelligence services in detail over many years. And anybody who says that Israeli forces are inhumane, they don't adhere to the laws of war, that they are immoral, that they deliberately target and kill innocent civilians, that they commit war crimes and crimes against humanity. It is the opposite of the truth. It's not just a little bit wrong, it's the diametric opposite of the reality. The reality is that there is no other army in the world, and I have spent 30 years in the British Army. I've served alongside American, French, German, Canadian, Australian military forces from around the world. No other army in the world that puts as much effort and resources and energy into trying to destroy the enemy that's attacking them to defend their country, while at the same time protecting the lives of innocent civilians. And Israel has the greatest challenge that any country has, because their enemies, Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they want Israel to kill their own civilians. They don't use human shields, which is often discussed. They don't want these people to protect their fighters. They want to use them as human sacrifices. They want Israel to kill those civilians. They want to lure them. They want to force them. They want to draw them into killing those civilians. So if that's the way your enemy is operating, it's extremely hard to prevent it from happening. But Israel succeeds. Israel goes to the greatest possible lengths to prevent the deaths of innocent civilians, even sometimes at the cost of the lives of their own soldiers. So I would utterly reject the kind of condemnation of the IDF made by ignorant people who are either ignorant or simply malign, who want to undermine the state of Israel by making false accusations against their soldiers.
Coronel, you are also an expert in terrorism, and the terrorism that Israel suffers has changed. Suicidal bombs in the past, rollovers and knife attacks now. In your opinion, is Israel prepared for the kind of terrorism that can arise in the future?
I think, as we all do, Israel has lessons to learn as the terrorist threat against it is evolving. I think it's a mistake to say that the terrorist threat has changed, but I think there are new and different methods used at the same time as the old methods. So, for example, the old form of suicide attack, car bomb or suicide vest strapped to a person, continues to be a threat and continues to be used. And then you have the slightly newer type of, you simply take what weapon you've got, whether it's a kitchen knife, whether it's a large stick or your own car, and use it against Israeli military or civilians or police. So it's an evolving threat, it's a developing threat, it's a threat where everything is possible, anything could happen. And I think Israel has shown itself, as with so many different areas of life, to be capable of evolving and adapting to this threat and dealing with it. I think that it will continue to do that. And who knows what the next wave of threats are going to be. Israel is fortunate in having one of the greatest and finest intelligence services in the world, which does what it can to keep ahead of the game. Britain as well has a very, very fine intelligence service, and incidentally we in Israel cooperate to a greater extent than the vast majority of other countries cooperate on intelligence. But we in Britain and the Israelis themselves and the Americans still can't foresee every single thing. The nature of terrorism is such that it's very, very hard to pin an attack down by the type of attack, the date it's going to happen and the place it's going to happen. So we're always surprised, and I think Israel will be continually surprised by these things. But it does have the ability to adapt very quickly to a new threat, and then when an attack occurs, if it's not stopped, at least then to bring things back to normal as quick as possible, so the whole country doesn't descend into the kind of chaos that some countries would descend into if they were subjected to the kind of assault that Israel is subjected to.
However, according to your point of view, is the terrorism we are facing up around the world nowadays being attacked as it should be? I mean, effectively?
The answer to your question is no. The terrorism we face is not being dealt with properly. And I mean, I could go into great detail on this, and obviously every case is different, every country is different, every situation is different. In my opinion, the most important weapon against terrorism is intelligence. And it's so critical that each of our countries who face a terrorist threat, and Mexico is certainly not a country that's immune from terrorism, and it's certainly a country that I think in the future could well face a greater threat than it faces today, as we do in Britain. And intelligence is fundamental, getting ahead of them, understanding what they're doing. Very difficult though, because of course terrorists today are very much attuned to our intelligence services and how they operate. So they find it much easier to get under the radar, but that's the most important thing. And I don't think we as countries invest enough effort in the intelligence that's needed these days, with communication so easy and so many different means of communication that people can use to intercept those communications and identify what's happening. I don't think we're doing enough on that front. And I think another area where we're not really putting the kind of effort in that we need to is cooperation between states, both on intelligence and more generally on methods, techniques and police action to try and reduce the terrorist threat. It's another area where we can always, I think, improve and do better. And I'd say the final area that we need to work on is it goes back really to the point I made earlier about what the threat Israel faces of having to deal with an enemy that uses its civilian population to protect its terrorists. And you know, we have to be hard-hearted about this to an extent. The last thing we want to do is kill innocent civilians. But we have to recognize one thing, and that is that while our enemies use human shields to defend themselves and to make themselves immune from counterattack, we have to be prepared, unfortunately though it is, to kill innocent civilians if necessary in the process. Otherwise we simply have to say, we're going to surrender. The terrorists win, we surrender. And you can look at an example of this happening in the Islamic State in the Middle East. You can look at what's happening in Mosul today, where the international coalition led by the United States is assaulting the city of Mosul. It is not being as effective as it should be because it's terrified that there might be civilian deaths. Unfortunately, tragic though that is, it's absolutely unavoidable, as it is in any conflict these days, from go back to the First World War, the Second World War, and even modern form of conflict. Civilians, unfortunately, are in the front line, and we can't be too much afraid of risking civilian casualties in order to defeat an enemy which will kill far more of them than our countermeasures will.
Coronel, I understand that you worked in the security group called COBRA. What was the objective of that unit?
Yes, while I was still serving in the British Army, I was a member of a group called COBRA, which is it's a crisis management committee that deals with crises, whether it's terrorism, kidnapping, or some other form of crisis affecting the United Kingdom. It's like the nearest thing you can think of is probably the White House Situation Centre. It's chaired by the Prime Minister. It's attended by cabinet ministers, and it coordinates government action in response to some form of crisis. My job in that committee, in the COBRA committee, was to coordinate our national intelligence services to support COBRA, to support the crisis management. And I was very privileged in many ways in that capacity, to be working internationally with organizations like the CIA from America and like the Mossad from Israel. And it goes back to a point I made before, that cooperation on the intelligence services is critical in countering the sort of threats we face. And so when in that role, in that capacity, I was dealing with organizations like Mossad, the CIA, other national intelligence services, to try and help Britain to deal with the threats we face. And also that organization would respond, for example, to the Madrid terrorist attacks when they occurred, coordinating and trying to help the Spanish intelligence services and counterterrorism services when they face these threats, and other European and international services.
Finally, Richard Kemp, I understand that you are now a retired soldier. So what do you do nowadays?
I do a number of different things. I do some consultancy work. I speak at events around the world, and I write in the national media. One of the perhaps the most important roles that I have is to be a member of the board of the Friends of Israel Initiative. And the Friends of Israel Initiative is a unique group. It was formed by the former president of Spain, Jose Maria Aznar, who is still the head of the organization. And it's made up of a number of prominent individuals from around the world, including several former heads of state and government ministers from Latin America and from many other countries around the world, some distinguished business people and historians, numerous people from other walks of life, but mainly at a very high level, who have influence and who are able to point out when governments or organizations are making mistakes in relation to Israel. So perhaps when they don't have the full facts and they're about to make a decision about Israel, whether it be at a government decision or United Nations or whatever, then this group can provide them with the information, can advise them where they're perhaps making a mistake. And it's a very powerful group, it's a very important group. It's a group that I think does a great deal on behalf of the State of Israel. It doesn't work for the State of Israel, it's independent. No member of that group is Israeli, and there's no direct connection with the Israeli government. But the members of the group, and Jose Maria Aznar takes the view that, and this is more or less a quote from him, that if Israel goes down, then the rest of the world goes down, because Israel is essentially an outpost of Western democracy. And if we see Israel crushed, then we might as well all give up. And I think therefore this group is intending to give the necessary moral and practical support to Israel, and it's very successful so far in doing so.
Coronel, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, a great pleasure talking to you.